In this video, I'm going to fully explain bar chords. We're going to cover what they are, we're going to talk about the theory behind when and why you might want to use them, we're going to talk about the 4 essential bar chord shapes, and then to cap it all off, I'm going to give you the exact exercises and practice routine I would use if I was trying to shorten my learning curve for bar chords. This video is for a couple of groups of players. Number 1 is the early intermediate player who keeps hearing this term bar chords and is ready for the full explanation, where I exclude all the silly hacks and shortcuts and I don't assume that you know everything already. The other group I think that can really benefit from this are players who have already been introduced to bar chords and who just want to go back to fill in any gaps in their knowledge. And honestly, even if you're not interested in playing guitar at all and you're just half passed out at 3 a.m. caught in a vicious autoplay cycle, you're welcome here too. I need all the views I can get. I'm very insecure and I need to know that people on the internet are looking at me. So whether you're ready to learn or you just want to fall asleep, let's get started. So first and foremost, bar chords are chords. They're groups of notes that sound good when they're all played together at the same time. If you're unfamiliar with chords, this video might be a little advanced for where you're at right now. I would recommend checking out my video where I lay out the guitar roadmap, the collection of concepts that you would want to learn in order, and I would figure out where you are and progress from there. For those of you that have been following along, we're right in the middle of the 4th level. But anyway, like I was saying, bar chords are chords just like any other kind of chord, which raises the question, why do we put that word bar in front of the word chords? Bar chords aren't called that because they're named after the only place I like being awake. They're called that because it puts them in contrast to the other main variety of chord that we play on guitar, which are open chords. Open chords are another one of those things you're going to want to be familiar with before you watch this video, but as a quick recap, they're called open chords because they involve open strings. There are unfretted notes that are being played in open chords. Bar chords are different because, unlike in an open chord, in a bar chord, every note is fretted. There are no open strings in a bar chord. Now you might be hearing that and thinking, hey dude, I only have 4 fingers with which to fret notes on the guitar, and this instrument has 6 strings, so how the heck am I supposed to use my normal human hand to make your stupid bar chords? The first thing I would tell you is to calm down. You are way too mad about this. The second thing I would tell you is that the way we're able to make bar chords and fret every single note is by using a new technique that you probably haven't used yet called barring, or making a bar. This is a technique where you take your first finger and you lay it across all 6 strings all on the same fret. This will be difficult at first. You're probably going to struggle to play all this cleanly when you first try it. And honestly, barring is really hard. It's very physically demanding, okay? It's the closest thing we get to an athletic event on guitar. The truth is, it just involves a lot of grip strength and using muscles that you probably haven't used before. But don't get discouraged. I can make bar chords and I'm not athletic, and in fact my physique has been described by many as a garbage bag filled with yogurt. And once you've mastered barring, or how to make a bar, you can add your remaining fingers in a chord shape on top of that bar to create a bar chord. So before we go any further, I want to show you guys how to do that. I want to show you how to make a bar, how to do some barring, and then we'll talk about adding the chord on top of that. Alright you guys, let's talk about how to bar. Unfortunately, there's really no secrets here. It is as simple as take your first finger and just pick a fret and press down really hard. While there might not be any secrets, I can give you some tips. First things first, how do you tell if you're barring correctly? Basically, just make your bar wherever you're doing it, and just take your right hand and go through each string. If there's a string that's kind of muted or buzzing or just not ringing out clearly, press down harder. Now like I mentioned before, barring is really going to be super crazy hard at first, alright? But there are a few things you can do to kind of make it easier to give yourself a progression up until you can make any bar that you want to make. First thing I would do is start at the 12th fret, alright? The 12th fret is the exact center point on the string, so theoretically the string tension is lowest there, and as you move back towards the headstock, the string tension is going to get higher and higher. So something you can do to practice is actually start at the 12th fret, and then just move your bar back and back and back as far as you can go. See if you can get it all the way to the 1st fret. That's really hard. Don't be afraid to take your 2nd finger, and I'm not trying to flip you off here, but don't be afraid to take your 2nd finger and just lay it on top of your 1st finger and help it push down. Obviously you can't do this forever because eventually you're going to need that 2nd finger to help make chord shapes, but for now, when you're just practicing trying to get the bar down, sometimes it's okay to assist yourself. And the other thing you can do if making bars on an acoustic guitar is really hard, which it will be, is try it on an electric guitar. You don't even have to plug in because this isn't even really about tone. It's just about making sure that you can hear each note of your bar ringing out. But electric guitars generally have lower string tension than acoustic guitars, so it'll be a little bit easier on an electric. In fact, I think a pretty good practice routine for this would be start off on the 12th fret of an electric guitar, because that's the easiest bar you can make. Work your way back all the way down the neck towards the headstock, and when you can comfortably make bars on the 1st fret of an electric guitar, then switch to an acoustic guitar and do the same thing. All the way back until you can comfortably make bars on the 1st fret. Now, don't worry about it if you don't have an electric guitar, if you don't have an acoustic guitar, and you can only practice on one. Eventually, once you do it enough and you're able to do bar chords, you'll be able to make bar chords on any instrument you want. But just while you're learning, you're trying to get that hand strength up initially, don't be afraid to play an easier guitar or, play bars higher up on the neck where they're easier. There's nothing wrong with progressing from the easier version of what you're trying to do up until the harder version. So that's the first step of making a bar chord, is just being able to make that bar. So focus on this and practice just this for a while. If you can't make just the bar, you're not going to be able to make any chords on top of it. Okay, so now that we've learned about how to bar, we still have the chord part of bar chords to tackle. There are 4 essential bar chord shapes that we're going to talk about in this video. They are the 6th-string root major shape, the 6th-string root minor shape, the 5th-string root major shape, and the 5th-string root minor shape. I'm going to show you how to play them, and then we'll talk a little bit about them. So we're going to start with the 6th-string root major bar chord shape. I'm going to stay here on the 5th fret just for this example. Step 1, like we just talked about, is make a bar across all 6 strings with your 1st finger. Next, you want to take your 2nd finger and put it on the 6th fret of the G string. Then take your 3rd finger, put it on the 7th fret of the A string, and take your 4th finger and put on the 7th fret of the D string. And then strum all 6 strings. Like I said, this is called the 6th-string root major chord, so it should sound like a major chord. It should sound upbeat and happy. And the root, the lowest note, should be on the 6th string here. In this case, that's A. So this is an A major chord. To make this a minor chord, all we got to do is remove our 2nd finger and keep everything else in place. So all this is just the bar with your 1st finger, and then your 3rd finger is on the 7th fret of the A string, your 4th finger is on the 7th fret of the D string. Again, the root's on the 6th string, and this is a minor chord, so it should sound sadder and more melancholy. In this case, the root is A, so this is an A minor chord. Now let's cover the 5th-string root bar chords. The big difference between these and the 6th-string root bar chords are that instead of barring across all 6 strings, we're going to bar only across the top 5 strings, so the A string through to the high E string. And we are not going to play the low E string in these bar chords. To make a 5th-string root minor chord, all we do is this. Make that bar across the top 5 strings like we talked about. You're going to take your 2nd finger and put it on the 6th fret of the B string. You're going to take your 3rd finger, put it on the 7th fret of the D string. And your 4th finger should go on the 7th fret of the G string. So altogether it'll be this. Now pay attention to the fact that, like I said, I'm not playing the low E string in this chord. Something that can help with that is when you're making your bar, instead of just avoiding the low E string altogether and letting it ring, you can take the fleshy point of your 1st finger and just rest it on the low E string. Not enough to fret it, but enough to mute it. It's a very subtle little move, but if you mute that string, you won't have to worry about avoiding it when you strum. Now with the 5th-string root major chord, there are 2 ways to play this. One is the technically correct way, and one is the way that everybody actually plays it. I'll show you the correct way first, and then I'll show you the way that is easier. You start the same way. Make that bar across the top 5 strings. Your 4th finger should go on the 7th fret of the B string. Your 3rd finger should go on the 7th fret of the G string. And your 2nd finger should go on the 7th fret of the D string. And then play that whole chord. Now that's a really difficult chord shape to make, so what most people end up doing is they take their 3rd finger or their 4th finger, and they sort of collapse that knuckle, and they make a mini bar across these 3 notes. So the same notes are getting played. Again, in this case, it's all the 7th fret on the D, G, and B strings, but instead of playing them like this, you just play them with another mini bar. And like I said, you can also use your fourth finger to do that. So the first thing I want to actually explain to you about these chord shapes are the naming convention. How do we name the chords? Just like open chords, bar chords are named for the root note, which is the lowest note in their chord. So if we take a 6-string root major shape, for example, the root will be on the 6th string. It'll be the lowest note. And at this point, you should have memorized the notes on the low E string. So you know that if the lowest note in this chord is this note, on the 5th fret of the low E string, which is A, and this is a major chord shape, that would make this chord A major. Same thing goes if it's a minor shape. If it's a minor shape and the lowest note is A, then it's an A minor chord. The same thing also applies to the 5th string root shapes. You should know the notes on the low A string, so you should be able to tell that when I use a 5th string root major shape here, and the lowest note is right here, E, you know that this is an E major chord. The reason I tell you this naming convention is because I want you to understand that these chord shapes are movable. Again, if I go back to that 6th string root major shape, I can play this here on the 5th fret like I showed you, and that'll be A major. But I can move this anywhere I want. I can move it up 2 frets to where the lowest note is B, and now it'll be B major, and the chord shape stays the same. I could move it anywhere on the fretboard. I could go all the way down here, make it an F sharp major chord. Same thing with that minor shape. I could move it anywhere. This would be a G minor chord. And as you might guess, it applies to 5th string root shapes as well. Here, the lowest note is D, so this would be a D minor chord. I just want to show you that these shapes are movable. The other thing I want you to see is how the bar chord shapes are derived from the open chord shapes. To explain this, let me walk you through this experiment with 6-string root bar chords. We're going to start in the 6-string root A major chord like we've been talking about for a little while now. I can move this anywhere I want. I can move it up and down. But if I were to move it down, maybe I go down 1 fret, maybe I go down more, maybe I bring it all the way down to the 1st fret. Now this would make this chord F major. And if I wanted to bring this chord down even further, down to the very 1st fret, I could do that. Only my bar would be kind of irrelevant now because now the nut of the guitar is there to be the bar for me. The lowest note here is E, which makes this E major. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because it is the same chord with a slightly different fingering than the regular E major chord that you already know. So the 6-string root major bar chord shape actually comes from this E major shape. Instead of using the nut as the bar and using the chord shape that looks like this, we switch up the fingering so that we can use our first finger as a bar and move the chord shape around. But it's still that E major shape. Same thing goes for E minor. If I take an E minor chord in the open position, you should already know this, and I switch up the fingering a little bit so that I can use my first finger to make a bar and move that around, I want you to see that that comes from the E minor shape that you already know. Now this also applies to the 5th string root bar chord shapes. If I'm on the 5th fret here and I'm playing a 5th string root minor shape, it might sound like this. It's a D minor chord. And I move it down. I get all the way down to B flat minor. But if I want to move it a little bit lower, now it's a minor chord, and my lowest note here is A. And this is a very slightly different fingering, but the same notes as the regular A minor chord that you already know. So just like with the E chords that we just discussed, we just change up the fingering a little bit so that we can use our first finger in place of the nut to move the bar chord shape around. Same thing goes for the A major shape. I can make it here, or I could switch up the fingering a little bit so I can use my first finger as a bar and move the shape around. So that's how you play the 4 essential bar chord shapes. But more than that, I wanted you to see how they're movable, what the naming convention behind them is, and how those bar chord shapes are derived from the open chord shapes. So now we know how to play the 4 essential bar chord shapes, and we know a little bit more about them. But you might be wondering why? Why do we learn bar chords in the first place? The answer really has 2 parts. Number 1 is that bar chords give us more options. If you only ever learn open chords, your options are going to be limited, and there's going to be a good amount of music that is inaccessible by you. Don't get me wrong, open chords still have their place. They're kind of like the cable TV connection of chords. They're simple, they cover the essentials and not much else, and your grandpa swears that it's all he'll ever need. But you want options, you want access. You want bar chords. If open chords are a cable TV connection, bar chords are the Hulu Plus of harmony. For example, if I want to play B flat major, I can only play that as a bar chord. That doesn't exist as an open chord. So bar chords give us access to many more chords than just open chords do. The other big benefit of bar chords is they give us multiple ways to play the same chord. Just as an example here, I have a G major chord, and this is the regular open chord that you're familiar with. I could play it like this, but now that I know bar chords, I can also play it as a 6th string root major chord. I could also play it as a 5th string root major chord. Either way, it's all a G major chord, but it gives me different flavors of the same fundamental chord. This can be really great to get more musical interest out of a song or a chord progression. Okay, so to wrap up the video, let's talk about the exact practice routine I would use if I was first learning bar chords and I was trying to learn them as quickly as possible. First thing I would do is manage my expectations. Learning bar chords has a lot to do with just developing hand strength, and your body can only get stronger so quickly, so there is a bit of a biological cap on how fast you can progress at this. I would split up my bar chord practice into 2 main phases, and I wouldn't spend more than about 15 or 20 minutes a day. Beyond that, you're probably not going to progress any more quickly because you're really hitting the threshold of diminishing returns. The first thing I would do if I was learning bar chords from the first time is I would do that barring exercise we talked about earlier. I would just practice making bars starting at the 12th fret and moving it down the fretboard until it got so hard that I couldn't do it, and then I would just start at the 12th fret and go again. This is all about effort and just getting your reps in. When you're finally comfortable barring, you can do it from the 1st fret all the way to the 12th fret with no problems. Then I would check out this video where I explain a chord changing exercise. In fact, it's the only chord changing exercise that actually works or even exists. That exercise involves switching between 2 chords, and I would just pick 2 bar chords. Like I said, 15 or 20 minutes a day, I would do those things, and I think at that rate you could expect to progress as fast as somebody could possibly progress with bar chords. I know this video was a dense one, so if you have any questions, ask them in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching.